Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to this week's live stream. This is my regular live stream back in its normal slot, which is 2 p.m. UTC every Wednesday, although I will warn you next week I'm going to be on later on in the day, I think 4 p.m. UTC on Thursday, just to confuse things. But that's what I've been doing for the last 2 weeks as well. So we've been moving around a little bit because we have a Thursday slot where I can stream on LinkedIn as well, and just gives a few more people a chance to see the stream. But yeah, temporarily back to the usual slot this week. If you're watching, then please drop a comment into the chat or the comments saying your name and where you are. It's always nice to see that people are listening. Otherwise, I'm just kind of talking into a blank screen, which starts to make me feel like I'm going crazy after a little while. So that would be great. Yeah, in fact, I'm just going to stick a note in there for people who join a little bit later. Drop your name and location in the chat. Yeah, there we go. This is what I get for moderating my own session, is that I have to type my own messages into the chat. Hey, Akshay, welcome to the stream. I don't recognize your name. We've got some regulars who turn up most weeks, but I don't recognize your name, but welcome. I hope you enjoy the stream. We are going to be talking Python. That's usually the subject of this stream, although I refuse to commit to only ever doing Python streams. But today is definitely going to be a Python stream. I have been building a document mapping library. It's experimental. It's called docbridge, but it's in a category of libraries called ODMs, which is a type of tool that stands for Object Document Mapper. Now, an object document mapping library, there are examples out there like Beanie, Odiamantic, Mongo Engine. There's a bunch of them for different languages, and the difference with mine, I think, is that whereas most of these libraries implement what's called an active record pattern, where essentially each document is wrapped by an object that maps to that document to a collection. And so you can do you can transform types and things within that object. You might be able to do, and then you can stick a nice object layer on top of it. In fact, sometimes you can map migrations onto it as well, because you kind of know how to transform the data over time. But you're limited to this pattern of one document for one object, and it gives you some advantages. It makes querying nice if you like that kind of thing, but it's not as powerful when it comes to actually modeling your data. So I am of the strong opinion that the data in your application, your logical model, is kind of the way you want to deal with your data, and you don't want to deal with the dirty details of how it's actually mapped and stored in the database. Because one of the mistakes that often beginner developers make when using MongoDB is to think that if they just dump a bunch of JSON files into MongoDB, they can store them and retrieve them efficiently. And that is often true with kind of smaller or simpler applications, but often when we start to model relationships and things like that, you need to think about how you model your data efficiently for storage, for indexing, and for essentially querying things efficiently. So there may be some data duplication, maybe data split up across different collections in different ways. And because MongoDB's rich data model is so powerful, you actually have a lot of options there about how you model your data. If you're interested in data modeling more generally, do check out the data design patterns documentation that we've got on the MongoDB website. There's a link in the description below. I pretty much have that link in every blog post I write, or every article I write, and every live stream that I give, because I think it's the most important document on the MongoDB website. So do go and check that out. Hi Punith. Thank you for joining us. Let us know where you're joining us from. One of the things I really like about doing live streams is that you've got people from all around the world, and time zones are the only restriction really about whether it's easy for people to join the stream or not. Time zones and I guess access to a fast internet connection. So without further ado, as I say, I've been building this ODM library. It's reached, I mean, I wouldn't want to say it's reached a certain level of maturity, but it's got quite a lot of functionality in there now, and I'll run you through through some of it just a moment. But one of the things I'd like to do today is to start to integrate it with FastAPI. FastAPI is like the third biggest framework for Python web or API development at the moment, but it's growing fast. It's got a lot of mind share, and it's one of the first kind of async first frameworks, I think, that's getting real traction. So yeah, very keen for my library to work well with async IO. And just seeing as we've got another comment, thank you, Vina, for joining us. Great to have you here. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's go. There we go. And oh, that's my calendar. I shouldn't be showing you that. There we go. And there's my email. That's even worse. Amateur. Right. So I realize the text is quite small here. So some people often view this on cell phones, which I find, it kind of difficult to believe because I don't really like doing things on my cell phone. But then I'm old, so that's maybe my own bias. And Patrick, nice to have you back. Great to see you here again. It's always nice to have you join us on the stream. So I'm going to be fumbling through some async IO stuff later because my library has been built as a synchronous or blocking library, and today I want to get it working with FastAPI. First, just a quick run through of where we are with docbridge. So docbridge can take some BSON data. So this is actually a Python dict, but it's got an object ID type in it, which is a native MongoDB type. And you can, as I just described, kind of define a document subclass for a user profile, and then you just pass it that BSON. And it will allow you to access the fields on there as if they're attributes. So that's kind of a very basic requirement. One of the things I would like to say is that notice that I haven't abstracted out the query to get this BSON. I've just assumed that you already have the BSON through using PyMongo or Motor directly, because I don't want to abstract out the query language at this stage, because I quite like the MongoDB query languages. The queries that you put into find or the aggregation framework, I think, are super powerful. And although they can seem a little bit overwhelming at first, especially aggregation pipelines, I find they become easier to read and write once you've got used to the basic format over time. So I don't really want to rewrite those at the moment, but I do want to make documents and the way that they map to data in your database kind of more intuitive. So taking this a little bit further, we can specifically define fields and say how they map into the underlying document. So I can take my ID attribute and map it to the underscore ID field in the BSON data, and it'll automatically do that mapping. Again, these are kind of, I think these are kind of straightforward. These are kind of things you get in any ODM. You can also do a transformation. So I can say my user ID should actually be an int. So that this field happens to be stored as a string containing numeric data, which is sometimes just something that happens over time with your database. You end up with things stored in the wrong type, and you need to kind of massage that when it's coming back into your application. And then, yes, this still works the same, but you notice this is now coming back as 4, which is an int. And I had something with a follower count. Oh, yes, you could still... yes, you can still access other doc fields. There's an idea in this document class of saying that a document is either strict or the default, which is dynamic, which means you can still look up fields like follower count that I haven't defined as fields. But if I had specified that this should be strict when I subclassed it, then I wouldn't be able to access any fields where I hadn't actually explicitly said, like, this field exists. So I'm going to skip full through fields because that's very similar to the renaming that I just showed you. And I'm going to talk about sequence field. Sequence field is the one that I think I'm most proud of. This was what I had in mind when I started working on this library. So the idea is sequence fields, much like a field, but it doesn't just map to atomic data, it maps to an array. There's a pattern called the subset pattern that is a very common way of modeling data in MongoDB, where maybe for a user profile, you've got a list of followers, and you might have 5 followers, which is very manageable, or you might have more like, 1 million followers if you're very popular. And this is a common question we get when we run webinars or do tutorials and things. It's like, how do I model my data to make sure that my document doesn't exceed the maximum document size of 16 meg? And this is really the answer. So the answer is you store just a subset of those followers. Maybe the first 10, the first 20. We recommend having no more than 200 items in an array, because it just makes traversing the document slower. It makes your queries slower if you're having to do a scan over data in your collection. And then you take everything after that point and store that in a different collection, or potentially the same collection in like overflow documents. But I find they're easier to manage if they're in another collection. So sequence field is very flexible. If I was just to define this first parameter, this would say it's an array of followers. And that would mean that when I start to iterate through the followers, it will just give me those embedded items in the followers field in my BSON document. And then once it's got to the end of the 20 items, it will just stop. But it will return you each one of those wrapped as a follower document. So this is another document that I've defined up here. In order to implement the subset pattern, that's obviously a bit tricky. If you're having to do that in your client code, then you're going to have to write this logic potentially every time and kind of say, okay, get the first 20. Oh, the user's scrolled further down the page, or they've requested the next page of followers. Now I need to do this other query to get extra data from this other collection. Well, in this case, I've said, well, the rest of the followers, the superset, as it were, are in this followers collection. I've got another collection called followers. And when you want to query those, you can call this callable. So I accept that this as a lambda is maybe not as readable as it could be. I'll probably rewrite this sample code. It's just a function. But this basically returns, it takes the object, which is this profile document, and it then generates a query to get the rest of the followers for it. The reason for this is that I need to access the user ID in order to look up the correct followers in the followers collection. And because I've bucketed those, just to add a bit of extra complexity, it's having to unwind them and then change the shape of the data. But that's not the point. Each one of these returns after the end of this query, you get a series of follower documents that can then be wrapped by the follower constructor, and you get kind of 60 items. In fact, I think it's 59 items instead of just the first 20. This is what I'm going to try and get working in a synchronous way today, because that's how I need it to work in FastAPI. Yes, as I say, the way that you use this is you just loop through it as you did before, but now it gets as you go through the first 20, it's just returning the embedded items, and then after that point, it then makes another query and starts streaming that data in from the other collection. There shouldn't be a need. I'm hoping, I'm giving you an introduction now in case you haven't watched previous episodes of this live stream. It is a bit of a series, but you shouldn't need to have watched those to appreciate today's stream. I hope you enjoy it. But just in case you do, there's some extra live streams in there. These are the pictures of me looking thoughtful. I don't know if you noticed, but today's thumbnail is slightly different, and it's me looking excited and all my crow's feet showing in the thumbnail. There was a reason that I didn't pick that originally, but Pedro, our producer, has picked that thumbnail for today. Okay, I think if anybody has any questions at any point, do drop them into the chat, and I will try to keep an eye on the comments and answer any questions as they come up. If not, I'm going to get going, and I'll show you the FastAPI application I actually wrote a few weeks ago as a sort of quick sample of using the library when it was in a very early stage. So let's bring up VS Code. I have too many programs open. Usually I do a bit of a tidy up before running a live stream. So let's hope I don't show anything private before while I'm on the live stream. So yeah, I have my project. My project kind of follows. It's a bit of a mess, actually. I have to say, there's some extra directories in here that I don't really know why they're there. But I've got my PyProject TOML for my library. I'm using Hatchling to build it, and the way I can then install that into my current virtual environment with Python -m pip install -e dot. Ooh, that's exciting. So this just installs the current library into I'm in the wrong directory. Into into my virtual environment, but it's linked to my live source code. So anytime I make changes to everything in the source directory, it's automatically kind of loaded into my next running of Python. And then I have my examples. There's a few scripts in here that just kind of show things off, but the FastAPI project that I built is called Y. It's a Twitter clone. Y is a joke because it's both a letter and a question, and it's also a letter that happens to be near X, which is the renaming of Twitter. I thought it was funny at the time. I've been told by one of my colleagues that it is funny, but I don't really believe her. So, yeah, if you're on the stream, Luce, I'm never going to be convinced that anybody else finds that joke funny. But that's partly because I'm essentially reading it out to a camera without any feedback, and the only person laughing at my jokes is me. So anyway, in the Y directory, I've got my requirements. I've got a script that I use to create the sample data that we're working with, which is this populate file here. I've got a playground that I don't remember writing, but I'm sure it's useful. And then we've got a oh, there we go. So actually the only file so far is this init.py in the Y directory. So it could have just been y.py at the top level, but I assume that at some point I'm going to end up with various roots and things configured in different files, and so it just makes sense to start off with a package. And then once I open that, this is my init file. So it's very short at the moment. It's really, I mean, partly this is to show kind of how much my library can do for you now if you use it. So when I wrote this, my library didn't do any interaction with MongoDB itself. So the idea was you did that with Motor. Motor is our async IO and Tornado compatible client for MongoDB. It actually wraps PyMongo. So one of the things it does is it spins up PyMongo in a thread pool, and then it sort of provides an async wrapper over what is essentially a blocking synchronous client. So you get all of the functionality of PyMongo and the kind of behavior you'd expect from PyMongo, but it's not necessarily, because it's not a native async IO library, you're not going to get some of the sort of predictable behavior that you actually get with async IO if it was a native async IO client. But there we go. It's configured with this environment variable. I'm getting a database called Y, and then collection called profiles, and my collection called followers. And then I just created something very similar to what you've just seen. Notice that followers is a sequence field, but I haven't added the extra configuration yet to load extra data from the other collection. There is also, so now I've got a single endpoint which just loads a single profile. I'm going to keep this. I don't think I'm going to have time today to get any further than that. But what I am going to do is try and get followers working properly. So at the moment, followers is, I'm just kind of, I'm iterating through these to get just the database ID. I don't know quite why I did that at the time, but it does show that I can loop through followers. Because I don't have a query or another collection associated with this as a superset, it's just going to give me back the first 20 subdocuments sort of in this array. But what I want to do is extend it so that it can look up extra data. So let's have a look at that. I'm going to just spin it up, Unicorn, and then Y and app. So that will spin up the service. And then I had this loaded in a browser a moment ago. There we go. So this is, I'll just refresh this to show that this is live. I'll try and make it a bit bigger for those reading on smaller screens. So this describes my endpoint. It takes a single user ID. The user ID I've been working with is 4. Try it out. There we go. 4. And then I can execute that. And it's working. But you'll notice that's only 20 items. You're just going to have to believe me that is only 20 items. I could generate something based on that data. That's probably a good idea. But that's not all of them. So let me, what's the best way to do this? So I just want to make it easy to see how many items are coming back, so that when I extend this, we can see that we're getting more items back. So user ID, followers, follower. Yeah. So let's just enumerate over here. And I'm just going to add an extra item, index and I. And I'm going to then, there we go. So I'm going to save that. Hopefully it should have reloaded. And now when I execute it again, oh, it doesn't. It does the same thing. I guess I haven't got debug specified here. I think that's a flag for debug. Maybe it's reload. If anybody happens to have this information on hand, like, do drop it into the chat. Oh, it's reload. There we go. Okay. So next time, hopefully that should just automatically reload. There we go, index 0, and then it should go up to 19. There we go. So I just got the first 20 items. Now let's add in the extra configuration from my sample script. I wrote a script last week to just sort of demonstrate some of this working. And then I commented it out so I could implement another feature. So there we go, superset collections, and in the Y, this is the bit that isn't going to work. So just kind of setting your expectations there. I should probably be doing this as test-driven development, but I'm afraid I'm not this week. I will get back to test-driven development next week so that we can see some best practice. Now let's execute this. Now, there we go. Internal server error. See, I set your expectations appropriately. There were a couple of times last week where I said, this is going to work now. And all I'd done was reveal another layer of errors. So that happens to me quite a lot. So do look out for that. That's always fun. We had somebody called Anirudh who really keeps, he's been here on a few of the streams, and he's very good at keeping an eye on what's happening with the code and some of the silly mistakes I've made. So he quite often drops some useful comments or just funny jokes in the chat. He's a good, yeah, they're a good person to have on the chat. Yeah, internal server. Oh, and I can see what it is here. So let me just expand the console a little bit. Working with limited screen estate here. There we go. So I've just tried iterating through a motor cursor. Now, motor cursors are asynchronous, which means that if I want to loop through them, I need to do an async for to loop through them. The problem is that I haven't written them as, my code isn't written to do an async for, it's written to do a for. So let's go and have a look at how I'm sort of putting this data together. So one of the things I'm doing when I instantiate a document is I pass it a database. This is a PyMongo database object, not a motor database object. So this is expected to be blocking, and then with that's in the document, and then in the sequence field, I should really keep my outline up. When I call get on the sequence, it basically build myself a chained iterable. So I'm literally using chain from itertools. Chain takes one or more iterables and then allows you to start looping through the chain object. And then once you get to the end of the first iterable, it then starts yielding items from the second iterable and so on. So the first iterable, these are my embedded items. They're coming from the embedded document. And then the second the second iterable is my superset. So this is the extra items from the other collection. Superset is actually a cursor. Superset is called it is the result of directly calling aggregate and find. So let me, while I'm here, let me cancel that. I am just, where's my terminal? Okay. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm about to run lazy git. There we go. and I would like to see all the panes. So LazyGit is an amazing command line tool for interacting with Git. As you can see, it shows you a lot of stuff. It shows me all my files in the top left and what's changed. And I can just hit space to get those committed if I want to. In this case, I don't want to. I don't think so at the moment. Shows all my local branches, tells me what's happening with the upstream. It's really cool. Also, a lot of the commands are single letter commands. So if I hit P, it will pull any changes from the database from GitHub. If for example I didn't have unstaged changes, I can also look up what I'm capable of doing here as by just hitting the question mark. So I can stash all my changes with an S. So currently broken. And then I can pull from GitHub. I don't think there are any changes coming from GitHub. And then I can unstash again. But I can pop from the stash by, I actually thought, is it you? I can also search stash. I don't know how to unstash. I'm always doing this, like sticking things on the stash and then forgetting to ever unstash them again. And I've only done this so that. Okay. Stash all index, stash all unstay, cancel. Git stash pop. There we go. So I actually don't know how to do that in LazyGit. The reason I was going to do this was because I'm going to create a new branch, and I can hit N in the branches tab, branches pane, and I can just give it a name. So in this case, I'm going to call it async.io because this is a bit of an experiment, and I'm not quite sure how I'm going to integrate two halves of this. So at the moment, I'm just going to pretend that we don't have a PyMongo version, and I'm just going to attempt to port stuff over to async.io and then see how that goes. Okay. So I hit Q to quit, back to here. Now I'm on a different branch, hopefully. So yeah, async.io branch, it's all good. Right. So what I really need is like an asynchronous version. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm not quite sure the best way to make it, like the simplest way to make this asynchronous. So I can create my own class and I can implement. I think it's a next. I have some notes. I can implement my own asynchronous iterator if I want to by implementing a iter and a next. But do I want to do that? Does anybody know if there's an asynchronous version of iter tools that I can use? Should we have a quick Google, like async.io chain? Let's have a look at this chain coroutines. Async.io gather. Okay. Let's have a look at this. It's interesting that it's got a completely different name, isn't it? I have to say, I have actually done a reasonably advanced talk on async.io, but it was a few years ago. So I understand the concepts, but on day-to-day async.io code, I don't actually do very much of that. So the trick really is to take something that's not asynchronous and something that is asynchronous and sort of turn them into a single chain. Let me just bring back up the my console so I can see what anybody's writing. Oh, Patrick's talking about task groups. Yes, I'd forgotten about those. Those something that I think came from Trio. They are just an awesome thing. It's like just the first time I went to a talk on Trio at PyCon US, it blew my mind. It's like it made kind of working with multiple coroutines and things very, very sort of straightforward. But yeah, I think I would like this to run on Python 3.11, especially given that I'm running Python 3.11 at the moment. So yeah, 3.12 is maybe not going to work for me at the moment. Okay, so can I just yield? Let's. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to write a function that literally just takes 2 items, and it expects the first one to be blocking and expects the second one not to be blocking. So I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but that's what I'm going to do anyway. Sequence. I don't want to call this group. No, don't like that. It's a superset iterator. And embedded, and I don't really want to call it superset, because superset includes the embedded data, whereas this is sort of the excuse me, it's a sort of extra. A plus B is the superset, and I just want B. Embedded, I'll call it related. And it's got to be asynchronous. So firstly, I'm just going to yield from. So that'll yield each of the items in the first sequence in a non-async IO way. Can I do that? No, I can't do that. Okay, so can I do a yield from an async function? For item in embedded yield item. Yes. Okay, then I can do an async. Can I do an async yield from? Well, I'll do an async for item in related, and then I can yield item. If anybody thinks this won't work, do let me know. And then I'm just going to return this superset iterator. Actually, I'm going to check to see whether this is none. If related is not none. There we go. So this is sort of an equivalent, a less generic version of chain. So there's my first item, and then this is my second item. And I've got some code that does the wrapping here as well. Okay. I'm just going to pass those in so that I can essentially do, given that I'm looping through them anyway, I can do the wrapping here. So this is the kind of thing that it takes your sub document in the BSON and it wraps it with, say, a follower object, follower class. And I just need to make sure all that data is available. So type and DB, and let's call it wrapper and DB. Oops, here we go. So one of the things I want to say is this is very specific. This code is not very generic, and so I know it's not good. This is the kind of process that I go through to try and identify patterns. Ultimately, what I may end up doing is turning this into a private method in sequence field, and then it will just have access to this wrapper function, and it'll have access to the database. And in fact, this is probably the right time to do that. Okay, let's do that. Self and ob. There we go. And then I'll put this inside my sequence field. I do try and give people a sense of my thought process as I'm building these things, and I do tend to write kind of quite intuitively. I don't give a lot of thought up front, but I do try and constantly think and catch myself when things don't, when they just don't look good. So self, ob, embedded and related, that's fine. And then we do the self type and obdb. Oops. So I'm just going to move this into here, yield, bing, and bing. Ob, by the way, is this is a field. I'm inside a field at the moment, and so ob is the document that's wrapping the field. So in this case, it would be a user profile. So now I can pass self and ob because I have them there. I'll let black or rough in this case to do its thing. Oh, I don't need to pass self in because obviously it's a method. And then because I'm doing the wrapping inside the function, it is occurring to me that I could possibly have just incorporated that asynchronous code directly in here. So I might do that later on. We will see. And then this is superset. Okay. Oops, I can get rid of Patrick's comment there on the screen. There we go. Give you a bit more ability to see what's happening on the screen. Do let me know in the comments if something I'm pointing at on the screen or selecting is obscured by my head, because obviously I've got this thumbnail in the corner of the screen and it's actually obscuring the terminal, which is not ideal. Not ideal. Given that I don't have long code width, let's just bring that back in so I can push the terminal over a little bit. Right. So now, oh, I've just realized I can't. Yeah, I'm going to have to make this asynchronous anyway. Because I'm calling it from here. You can only call an asynchronous function from another asynchronous function. So see, I'm really rusty on a lot of this stuff. This is not an area where I can just instruct. So you're going to have to watch me fumble through. I did warn, if you were watching on the if you came to this via my social media, you know that I said I was going to fumble my way through this. So we will see how I do. I can't do a yield from. Can I do an async yield from? Is that even a thing? And can you have an asynchronous get? Maybe. Shall we see what happens when we try to run this code? That sounds like a fun thing to do. So this is, I'm going to be awaiting. Profile. Oh yeah, no, I was looping through here. So now I'm going to followers. But I'm wrapping it in enumerate, and enumerate isn't an async function either. It's really funny how you end up with these your functions having colors. And having to try and catch those. Okay, well, let's see what happens. Let's execute Intel server error. So async for coroutine is not iterable. So I'm trying to enumerate through a coroutine. So we'll get rid of the I here and just, Async for requires an object with an iter method. Got coroutine. Okay. So I think I needed to await this. Whoa. And I think that worked. Did that work? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I can't count them. This is really bugging me. Let's try. Oh, this is really silly. And then I'm just going to add it in. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to think of the easiest way to do this thing. So I've got an asynchronous get. Do I need this to be asynchronous? I mean, I should do. So followers, you can put this in. This is an array. Well, for f in followers, and then I'm just going to add an extra item in f index equals I, and then I've got to enumerate this. Enumerate followers. I goes over here. Right. So and then this will just be followers. One of the things that I would like to point out while I'm here is kind of a good practice thing, which is that I am not just passing back the data that comes from my database. I would say with a mapping library like this, you're kind of safer passing your data model from your application, your logical model, back to your clients. But there's always the danger, especially with a dynamic data model, that like this is by default, that you're going to pass back fields that you maybe don't want to, that aren't part of your documented interface. And so I quite strongly believe that there's a physical model, which is what you store in the database. There's a logical model, which is how your application deals with the database. And then there's your public model, that's really the filtered data, filtered and clean data that goes to the user, and that should be quite heavily regulated. Like that should never change, except in ways that are approved, documented, and ideally validated as well. Because ultimately, if you ever have any undefined behavior in your API, people are going to take advantage of it. If you've got endpoints that are accessible, people will find them and then they'll start using them, and then you can never change them. So it's always good to know what's yours to change and what's publicly available, and essentially, like, it can't change without an incompatibility. And there's lots of companies with APIs out there like Twilio and things like that have stuff in their APIs that they'd really rather get rid of, but they're not really able to, because there's too many large customers that are already dependent on the specific and in some cases undocumented behavior that their API produces. So it's just good to have this separation. Let's execute this again, see how it goes. 26 to yeah, it really is pulling in that extra data. So I have actually managed to get this working in FastAPI. If anybody was hoping that I was going to do some of the React stuff from a FarmStack app this week, I do apologize. I've kind of done a bit of a bait and switch. This is really all async IO and FastAPI. One thing that's worth noting is if I was to create a Pydantic definition of my model. So at the moment, I'm just handing back JSON data here, or at least JSON compatible data, and then FastAPI will automatically encode that for me. Oh, Anirudh, you're here. Thanks for joining us again. Always good to see you. So yeah, that I will say this is not perfect. So I don't like this await. I'm gonna try and get rid of it, because ultimately followers is lazy. So there should be no IO actually going on there. So let me just see if I can get rid of that at the moment. This would make this code slightly more compatible. Just a bit worried about passing back. Yeah, it's like I'm just not quite sure that passing back this call to an asynchronous method. In my work, I'm returning the result, which should be a coroutine. Yeah, okay, let's go. Internal server error. There we go. Async 4 requires something with an AITA, but I got a coroutine. Whoa! We've got Ken Alger on the stream. Hi, Ken. Great to see you. Ken is a colleague from a couple of years ago, so very much enjoyed working with Ken. So great to see you on the stream. And we've got Shivam from India. Thank you for joining us, Shivam. I hope I'm not ruining the pronunciation of your name. And Anirudh has come back with, oh, yeah, it's Ken is pointing out it's very early where he is. And Anirudh is saying that I have to await something somewhere. So I don't think that's actually the case, because maybe. So what am I actually returning from here? So I'm really yielding from here. So this is, yeah. This is asynchronous, and that's asynchronous. So actually, yeah, at the moment, I feel like I should be able to hand back an asynchronous iterator that effectively does this. But I'm just not quite sure how to do it. So if I hand back an asynchronous iterator, then I can just hand that back immediately because it's lazy. And so I don't need to await anything, because ultimately I'm just handing back some encapsulated behavior. Hi, Dilip. Thank you for joining us. Great to have you here. Where are you joining from? Will say I'm in the last kind of 10 minutes of this stream. So if I can't track this down this week, I'm going to have to try and track down this problem before next week. It's funny. I feel like it's been quite a slow session today. But we've had pretty consistent numbers on the stream today, which has been really nice. You're all dedicated, is what you are, and I appreciate that. So we've got Anirudh suggesting I could return a callable, which is either a list or a generator yielding async function, I guess. And then yeah, so what you're suggesting is very much the way that Django and Flask do asynchronous stuff, is that as soon as something's defined as asynchronous, they get hold of the current loop and then stick it in there and say, they essentially say, do a blocking call to this asynchronous function and wait for it to complete. I think I'm going to have two separate implementations, because fundamentally, like, asynchronous applications and synchronous applications are kind of incompatible. Django wants to be a framework that supports inputs from both. In my case, I'm the other way around, because I'm not a framework, because it's a library. I'm only going to be, this library, docbridge, is only going to be operating in either an asynchronous environment or a synchronous environment. Daylight savings. My daylight savings hasn't changed so far. I think that's at the end of the month we get that. So yeah, I'm sorry you're a little bit late, but still glad you made it. So we've got some other comments. Anirudh is suggesting that we can do the stick it in a loop and wait for it to complete. And then he's just agreeing with what I just said. So Dilip, I'm afraid that this is this week is not a session about artificial intelligence and machine learning. I'm covering a specific library that I've written that would nevertheless make it easier to work with a machine learning library. What I will say is, if you look through the MongoDB Dev Center. There are a bunch of really cool articles being written by some of my colleagues, including our AI specialist Richmond in my team, about using MongoDB with LangChain and a SuperDuperDB. I interviewed the creators of SuperDuperDB, which is an AI framework around MongoDB and some other databases. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on, but I'm not the person to with the expertise to really help you with that, I'm afraid. So I'm just going to try and get this to, it's so frustrating. Just trying. So if get is, where am I now? This isn't even the right field. This isn't the right field. Fall through field. There we go. Sequence field. So this get should not be asynchronous because it's lazy. Get collection find. See, these are asynchronous functions. Oh, no, they're not. Actually, what they do is return an asynchronous cursor object. So another thing while we're here, aggregate and find don't talk to the database initially. They don't do anything when you call them. What they do is they return a cursor that wraps up the query that you've provided it. And then as soon as you start to iterate through that cursor, or you pass it to list, which does its own iteration through the cursor, at that point, it will finally contact MongoDB and execute the query and start and return the results. So yeah, that's why these aren't asynchronous methods in Motor. But here where I start to, so self.superset iterator. How about I make this? So that's not asynchronous, but I can return an asynchronous iterator. Just the same name, but with different case. And then I can pass it self and ob and embedded and related. And then we'll just, I'll probably get rid of that function because it's an extra layer of indirection that we don't need. Class superset iterator def init and self ob embedded and related. That will just store them away. A iter. Oh, I think that will be an async. This is just going to return self. And I've forgotten to put self in the parameter list because I always do. And then async def a next self. It's going to return the next one, but yeah. Whoops. Let me just comment those out. I've got 5 minutes. There is absolutely no way this is going to work, but let's try anyway. Dot ob equals ob self dot embedded equals embedded. So this is very much like the hard way of doing yielding. And Ken is telling me that I've got some positive thinking going on. Anirudh is asking me to talk about a trial with Pydantic. So I think I would build on Pydantic. I don't think I'd fork Pydantic. But Pydantic integrates quite well with FastAPI, and it includes some validation stuff that I don't have in my framework here. Because I feel like there's a separation between the logical model and your interface, like I feel actually you should kind of copy the data across into your user interface or provide a Pydantic wrapper of some kind, so that you're consciously copying data into the client's domain. That was really what I was thinking about with Pydantic. I don't know whether I could take the framework that I've written and actually make it work with Pydantic. I just haven't worked with some of the inner guts of Pydantic enough to know whether that's going to be enough of a benefit. Although, I mean, the Beanie and Odiamantic ODMs that already work with MongoDB, they are extensions to Pydantic that obviously work with MongoDB and allow you to query data in MongoDB. So potentially that could work really well. I just don't quite know what's involved. I see what you mean. Fork docbridge to have Pydantic, but yeah, no, it's that would be. It would be more, I think at the moment that would be more of an experimental branch in my repo than necessarily a fork. But it's been something I've been thinking of from the beginning. I just haven't had a chance to do enough research into it to see. So here I would kind of need to manage my state. So if it would be like, I'd have to have the index. I'd have to tell it whether I'm on it, going through embedded, going through related, and which one I'm going through right now, which step I'm at right now. And then I would need to do a sort of async next or a next, depending on what type of structure it is. So that's not gonna work very well. It's like this mix of sync and async stuff, which I have here. It feels like this is a pattern that probably happens all the time, and I feel like there should be something like itertools, or maybe something in the async IO framework itself that already does this. So I tell you what I'm going to do, because I think this is quite an interesting challenge. I'm going to go away and do some research on the best way to go about this. I hope I've explained the problem, and my thought processes as to trying to solve it have been useful. Usually I manage to end with everything on green, but sadly not going to manage that this week. But really appreciate you all joining me and watching me fumble through some of the intricacies of trying to make a blocking library, sort of trying to migrate that into an async IO library. And yeah, if you've enjoyed this, please do like and subscribe. As I said earlier, I will be back next week on Thursday at, I think, 4 p.m. And I'll be streaming on LinkedIn as well. It amazes me that LinkedIn is a streaming network these days, but apparently that's where we are now. But yeah, I appreciate having you here, and lovely to see friends like Ken and Patrick, and new friends like Anirudh on the stream. So hopefully I will see you next week. Take care, everybody.